iMetrics возросло в 2 раза, то есть рост составил в 2 раза от года к году. Если вы помните, в прошлом году был наш каши, сейчас у нас в гостях Джеффри и Брайан Айзенберги, которые будут читать кино сегодня. Они будут читать его по очереди. Сначала один, потом будет короткий перерыв. Буквально 5 минут перевести дух. И будет сразу вторая часть. И завтра они проведут также мастер-класс. Ну, я думаю, что все присутствующие здесь либо слышали про братьев Айзенберга и знают, в какой сфере они работают. Если же нет, то эти двое прекрасных молодых мужчин представляют оптимизацию конверсии, они авторы многочисленных книг, семинаров. И мы уверены, что всем присутствующим будет крайне полезно узнать об западном опыте такого интересного направления, как оптимизация конверсии. Пожалуйста, давайте поприветствуем наших гостей. И сразу говорю, что, как обычно, после выступления секция вопросов, мы будем ходить с микрофонами по залу. Если вы хотите задать вопрос, поднимайте руки, пожалуйста, и дальше.
Звука нет в наушниках пока. Все получилось. Добрый день всем. Меня зовут Джеффри Айзенберг, это мой брат Брайан. Эта презентация, которую я собираюсь дать, это традиционно дается Брайану на iMetrics, где мы в истории оптимизации. Сегодня я собираюсь рассказать эту презентацию, и сразу после этого мой брат Брайан и сделает еще одну, и в этой презентации мы расскажем с самого начала к оптимизации конверсий. Брайан рассказывал и мне тогда, несколько лет назад. Мы говорили про оптимизацию конверсий. Он мой младший брат. И вы, наверное, знаете, как это бывает. И он будет рассказывать эту презентацию по Big Data. Она будет рассказывать о будущем, в целом маркетинг оптимизации. А я начну тогда со своей. Мы все знаем эту метафору ведра. И когда люди говорят про ведрие, давайте наполним ведро. Если вы хотите налить в ведро воды, может быть, мы больше не ходим к колодцу, но если мы хотим налить в ведро воды, и в нем есть дырки, то у нас не получится наполнить ведро. Мы хотим сначала должны залить дырки до того, как наливать, потому что мы не хотим просто уйти домой и по дороге вся вода выльется. Это метафора, которую используют люди для онлайн-маркетинга. Мы используем эту метафору ведра с дырками. И почему эта проблема с гравитацией становится такой большой проблемой? Я расскажу чуть позже. И все хотят больше трафика. Я не буду вас даже просить поднимать руку. Я могу представить себе, что это так. Если бы я спросила, кому нужно больше трафика на веб-сайт, все бы сказали, да, я очень хочу больше трафика на сайт. И я хотела бы поспорить с этим, потому что часто это происходит так. Вот как мы вчера из аэропорта ехали, знаете, происходит такое. Если вам знаком этот вид, то мы испытали его прямо вчера, когда ехали в аэропорт Московского. То есть мы получаем этот трафик, и мы не обязательно знаем, что мы хотим с этим трафиком сделать, куда он пойдет на сайте, что произойдет и что туда приведет. И в 2010 году, это самое точное данные по 56,8 миллиарда долларов были потрачены в среднем в Америке и в Европе на генерацию трафика. В целом конверсия на сайтах это 2-3%. Это ужасно много денег на такого низкого показателя конверсии. И в целом средняя компания тратит $92 для того, чтобы на приведение людей на сайт, и только $1 на конверсию. Что-то не так в этом уравнении. В 96-м году, 97-м году, когда Брайан мне это рассказывал, этому я поверил. Но скоро начнется в 2013 году, и это все еще так. Я хотел бы когда Брайан только начал думать про эту презентацию, первый вопрос, который хотел поставить, когда все начали делать оптимизацию конверсии, и когда мы написали нашу первую книжку по этому вопросу в 2004 году, мы были очень озабочены вопросом, что кто-то раньше нас написал эту книжку. И тогда они скажут, и в 2008 году только написали книжку по оптимизации конверсии. То есть особенностью. Брайан начал на Atari в 80-м году. Это был такой компьютер Atari. И он начал делать такой вот интерфейс. Он просто никак не мог от этого оторваться. То есть, если Брайан что-то интересует, он только об этом и думает. И он создал эту борд. Он постоянно менял меню и думал, может ли он людей побудить делать что-то, что он от них хотел. Это ужасно интересно. Если вы понимаете, если люди понимаете, что они хотят, вы получаете очень сильную власть. И если вы об этом подумаете, очень многие, которые вот так построены. И в 94 году мы построили эту компанию. Это было время SoftBank. Это вы, наверное, в Москве не знаете, что это. Это был такой период, в самом начале интернета, когда все зарабатывали деньги на чем угодно. И были очень глупые компании, которые строили сотни миллионов долларов на строении веб-сайтов, и вы ничего не могли у них купить. Вы ничего не могли на них найти. И просто то есть они реально тратили на это сотни миллионов долларов. Это был целый период. И где-то в 2001-2002 все эти сайты умерли. И все эти выпускники колледжей делали очень много денег, хотя им стоило где-то еще начать карьеру. И мы думали об этом. Мы думали, стоит ли нам остаться в этой области, где стояли. Ну, тогда это было просто потрясающе. И мы были достаточно глупыми, чтобы остаться. Мы были среди тех людей, которые сказали, что это даже если все остальные ушли. И начало 2000-х были очень тяжелым временем для онлайн-индустрии. И мы хотели... Это цитата Джона Уанамерка. Он известен по своей цитате. Я знаю, что половина моих долларов потрачена зря, только не знаю, какая половина. И в начале цифрового мы точно знали, какая половина. Мы могли сказать, это не сработало. То есть люди пришли с этой рекламы и сразу отвалились. Это не сработало. Я понимаю, что это безумие, но мы можем ответить на этот вопрос, мы так считали. Но вообще-то люди уже 50-60 лет очень озабочены на эти вопросы. Мы станем очень богатыми, очень знаменитыми, но все-таки еще нас никто не слышал. И это не странно. Это то, как происходит маркетинг. Вот Дэвид Огилви, один из самых известных людей в рекламной индустрии.
Of business. It's useless to be creative, original thinker, unless you can also sell what you create. When Ogilvy originally ran his agency, he would not allow anybody to enter creative contests because he says it didn't matter how creative you are, it didn't matter how original you were, how beautiful it was. What actually mattered was if it created money for the client. That was the only important metric was, did it sell? Now, I'm going to show you a little video from David Ogilvy. Okay, and it's about 2 minutes long, and I'd like him to say it in his words, and I'll give you a little bit of context. He was invited to speak at the Direct Marketers Association, right? And there are two schools of thought in marketing, right? The big two schools of thought are the people who do brand marketing, big advertising, companies, and the direct marketers, the ones who get direct response. They send out something and they get it back. And the Direct Marketing Association had asked him to speak, and he couldn't speak there because he was going to be in India, and so he made a video for them. And this is a video of him in 1963, early 60s, okay, speaking to this conference. Well, no, guys, are we not getting any audio? All right, hold on. I'm going to play through the speakers. Huh? Well, we'll try.
You know, in the advertising community today, there are two worlds. Your world of direct response advertising, and that other world, the world of general advertising.
All right. Well, so I'll have to summarize. This is working with technology. It happens. So essentially, what he's saying to the direct marketers is that in their world, they know exactly what works. They know that long copy sells better than short copy. They know that if they're telling a story, that it makes sense to tell the whole story. They know that a commercial that takes 2 minutes is better than a commercial that takes 30 seconds. They don't have opinions, they have facts. And he's telling them that the day will come soon where marketers who are general marketers will learn from the people in direct marketing, and eventually they'll all become one. Well, that day never, ever, ever came. In fact, it still hasn't come. Okay? And so while it's a great prediction, it's simply not true. And what he maybe didn't have the perspective to know that we know now, it's almost 80 years later, right? 80 years after Claude Hopkins wrote Scientific Advertising, okay, where he was saying something very similar to what Ogilvy was, we now have the perspective of saying, okay, so nobody really wants to answer the question this way, right? What Claude Hopkins has said, almost any question can be answered cheaply, quickly, and finally by a test campaign. And that's the way to answer them, not by arguments around a table. Go to the court of last resorts, buyers of your products. And the thing is today, we don't test them in weeks or months. We can test things in a few minutes sometimes if you have enough traffic. Often in a day or two, you can know exactly what to do or what not to do. And yet, this is still not the current state. When I'm saying these things, it's still the leading edge instead of what people really want to do. And so I'm going to give you some more thoughts about why conversion optimization is like that. The problem is that it's hard to explain. See, if you're going to buy traffic, you can hire a media buyer. What does a media buyer do? Buys media, right? Maybe they buy display. Maybe they buy even Google AdWords. It's a little bit more complicated, but again, they're basically buying media, they're buying traffic, and it's very simple to explain. What do you do when you increase conversion rates? You change copy, you do A/B testing, I mean, there's so many disciplines to know that it's very complex, and so it's very, very hard to understand, and it's why it's very difficult to place in an organization. So if we look back, right, all the way back at the beginning of the internet, you'll see, does anybody know what that top image is? First banner. This is a very well-educated audience, okay?
Does anybody know what company bought that banner? Actually,
it still sounds, the writing still sounds like the brand that bought it. It hasn't changed at all.
Nobody knows. Go ahead, tell them.
AT&T. They bought it on hotwire.com.
Okay, so, and this is also the first Amazon page. Now, what you'll see is that it's still based on hyperlinks. While there have been so many technology changes in the literally 15 or 16 years since then, right? Basically, the technology has remained the same in the way that we take this in. In 1999, when we were getting started, we had a customer called Magmol. And I remember Jason Cement was the owner of the company, and he was very, very, very nervous because he wanted to get an investment, right? And he couldn't get an investment, and he was very worried about it. And this other company called E-News, they got an investment. They got $10 million. And you know what Jason had? This. Right? He was just building his website where he sold magazines, and he had zero investment other than the one he made personally, right? But he didn't have anybody else give him money. And he was very, very concerned because he wasn't doing well. And he came to us and said, guys, can you help us? And this was our very, very first client. This was the first person paying client. This is the first person who paid us. Well, okay, fair enough. And also, when we were working for other people, because we had worked as employees for other people doing web optimization, but this is the first client who actually said, I'll give you some money, right? And we said, sure, we can help you. And so what happened, right? 2 years later, by 2001, his website looked like this, and it was converting 4 times more than when we started, right? A 400% increase. And this site, well, there was a little sign on there that said that they had gone out of business, right? Because the idea of how much traffic you get has very little to do, unless you sell advertisement, with how much money you can make, right? Is there anybody who doesn't understand the math, right? The math isn't hard, right? If you have 1 million visitors to your website and nobody buys, you make how much money? 0. Okay. If you have 10% of the people buy and they only spend $1, how much do you make? $100,000, right? So if without a conversion, there is no income. About this time, we wrote our first book. And it was a self-published book, and it was distributed by WebTrends. And it was the first book about web analytics that was first practical book that was written. The thing is, there was actually the second book, because 1 month before, Jim Stern had come out with a book, but WebTrends was distributing this book for us, and they weren't on time to distribute it. So we wrote it before him, but it came out 1 month later. So we were the second book on web analytics. And if you look at the book today, and you did the things that we said to do there today, it would still be useful to you. And I would likely say that there's at least half of you who aren't doing the things that we were advising in 2001. And that's not because I'm looking at you and saying, oh, this group looks bad, or no, actually, because I'm being generous, because it's very likely that there's even less than are doing it, okay? We were saying some very simple things.
Actually, very, very simple story. How many people here have been doing web analytics since before 1990, no, till 2000, 2001? Anybody here doing analytics? One of you. Do you remember doing web analytics in a spreadsheet? Okay. When we first wrote that book, there was no such thing in any web analytics tool as a bounce rate. None of them reported a bounce rate. We were the first ones to come up with something that we called reject rate. And it came from there, and then it slowly got adopted by all the other web analytics tools as a standard measurement. But it just kind of gives you a perspective how early that book was. And there's still things in there that people are not doing.
Like penetration rate.
Like penetration rate and a few others.
Right? But at the same time, right, and this is why I said you saw that picture of Einstein, this is what made it so very difficult. We also wrote a book on copywriting. And so nobody could figure out, what are you? Are you guys web analysts? You know, are you geeks? Or you're copywriters? Or you write? What are you, marketers? Nobody understood what it was that we were doing. And the thing is that it's still the difficulty is that this requires those multiple disciplines. You cannot just have both. If you show me a great analyst who cannot explain what they do to the marketers, the analysis is worthless. And if you show me great marketing, great copywriting that isn't based on any metrics, I'll show you bad copywriting. And so what we have today is everybody wants this gorgeous car, right? This is the model we want, right? But what we actually have is this. Okay? This is the current state of optimization, and we travel and we speak in a lot of countries. We don't find it to be necessarily better in any one place. Okay? It's just what it is.
Actually, I would say that from all the countries, and I haven't spoken to enough people here yet, but the Germans are definitely farther advanced in optimization than most of the rest of the world is so far.
So what we were trying to explain is how we buy. Now, from the time of Hippocrates, okay, and then Carl Jung, and I can go on and on with all the explanations, basically people have known that personality types break into 4 basic ideas, right, 4 basic concepts, and that brain lateralization is the physiological explanation for why we act the way we do. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it more understandable to everybody else. So we started explaining to people that basically there were 2 axes. The first axis was the pace of deliberation, how quickly you would act or how slowly you would act based on the information. Did you need a lot of information or only a little bit of information to act, right? The second one was your bias towards objectivity. Did you need very, very objective factual information, or did you need very subjective, much more emotional information? And what would happen is you'd basically wind up with these 4 quadrants, right? If you were competitive, it meant that you acted quickly, but from a logical bias. If you were methodical, you acted, again, slowly, right? Much more deliberately, but again, with a logical bias. A spontaneous person acted quickly, with a much more emotional bias. And then the humanistic was one who needed a lot more information, again, deliberate, but with an emotional bias. And we started explaining this, and it drove people crazy. Why? And we'll show in the workshop tomorrow, we'll actually show you the scientific basis for this and how you can actually see this, both in web analytics and eye tracking studies, how you can see this pattern over and over and over again, but I don't have time for it right now. Okay, and what we started to explain to people was that you cannot do slice and dice optimization. You can't, it's not all random. It's not a random chance to beat. I was at the Web Analytics Association today, the Digital Analytics Association conference, speaking with 150 marketers just from Dell. There were about 350 people in the room, but 150 of them were from Dell. And I said to them something that almost made their heads explode. I said, if you're testing, you should know the direction of the test better than 50% of the time. I didn't say you have to know the result of the test, but you should know the direction of the test. You should know whether the test is likely to succeed or not likely to succeed. And their head almost exploded. They said, well, but we don't know even 10% of the time. I said, well, then what is the difference if you took a coin and just flipped the coin? I said, if you don't have any way of really understanding in advance what's more important or what's more valuable, then it's just guessing, right? And seriously, their heads almost exploded. They sent us emails for probably like 2 months afterwards on this discussion. So I'm going to show you a very practical example of it, something that we show to people all the time. This was on the website called Overstock. Right now, they're a several billion-dollar company, but at that time, they sold about $500 million a year. And this was their 3rd most popular page on the site. This is the category page for movies, right? They sold at that time VCRs, VHS, all this kind of thing. And on this page, they had a 92% bounce rate. That means 92% of the people who came to the page left, 91.8 to be exact, right? And they had statisticians, they had a whole team for optimization, and they came to us and said, we don't understand why. And so most people would look at this page, and they would do this, right? One by one, and they would look at each section, and they would test against each section, right? That's sort of the current state of testing, and it's built that way because the tools are built that way, right? A/B testing tools, multivariate testing tools are built with the concept of we're going to test a section. We looked at it and said, that's ridiculous. Don't you know what's important? And we looked at it through the 4 different personality types, and we said, I won't take you through all the examples, but essentially the one that we looked at that we could impact immediately was that the people who were competitive, they wanted to search quickly. They didn't have time to waste. They usually knew what they wanted. And so we said, where's the search bar? And if you'll look, the search bar is right here. And next to it was a little picture that said, kids' titles for learning and fun. And we looked at it and said, oh, we know what's wrong. Okay? And literally the next morning, and by the way, this is a conversation that I had with the CEO at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay? We're typing online. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Brian sent them an image. We changed this image next to the search box. Because what we wanted to do was just say, there's 24,000 things. Now, they eventually replaced this with a much better image. But we just said, do this test, put it up now. And essentially we did that. And as you can see, the CEO of Overstock said, we lifted their overall sales by 5%. Now, if it's a
that wasn't just movies. That was the whole website.
Right. So if you look at a $500 million opportunity like that, that's $25 million in sales a year. And this is one of my favorite stories, and it's also the story that most scares me, because I know that there's not a person here who doesn't want to go back to the office right now and find that one test that's going to increase sales by $25 million, right? And that's the danger of this, is that not every test will increase your sales by 25 million, right? But it's also how powerful one change could be. So I always worry when I tell this story. So over the years, we've also learned a lot from clients. It hasn't been just what we knew. If you took everything we knew in 1998, it would be scary. Okay, we learned some very good stories. So Dell was a client of ours, and they taught us one of the very best things possible. Now, we had given them an analysis of their website, and seriously, it was about this thick. Okay, and it had hundreds of suggestions, and I'm sure that all of them were very good because, of course, we did them. Right? I'm sure they were wonderful. But Sam Decker, who is in charge of this consumer site for Dell, said to us, the best question we heard, by far, the best question was, okay, what do I do first? And we said, I don't know. What do you read it? He says, I don't have time to read it. What do I do first? And we said, well, listen, Sam, really? Like, I don't know. I just sent you everything that's wrong. And he taught us a system for optimization. And I think we go through it a little bit tomorrow in the workshop. But basically, what he taught us was a way to optimize by 3 categories.
Prioritize, not optimize.
Prioritize. Time, right? How long it takes in the calendar, and in terms of man hours. Impact, how important it could be, right? And then resources, right? Whether it took money or other things, or what else it would take. And what he did was say, okay, if it was the perfect score, that's what we'll do first, right? The least resources, the least time, the most impact, right, was the first thing that we wanted to do. And we found one thing, and it was responsible for tens of millions of dollars. In their configurator where you could choose a Dell, they went from learn more to help me choose. And again, it's just us understanding. What we said was, when I'm trying to buy a computer, I don't want to learn anything. If I wanted to learn, I wanted to learn it maybe a week, a month, 2 months before. But right now, I just want to buy this computer. Help me choose was a much more powerful call to action. It was responsible for 8 digits. It was responsible for more than $10 million in sales. There's a hierarchy of optimization. There's a way that we look at this that's very important. And when we built this hierarchy, Brian felt like he had permission to do it because he went to the same college where Maslow taught. Okay, so we called it Eisenberg's hierarchy. Okay, but it works very, very, very similarly to Maslow's hierarchy, because the first one is functional. If your website does not work, it cannot convert. Don't fix anything else. fix the functionality first. The second one is accessibility. If you can't access the feature, right, or you can't access the website, go fix that first because nobody will care. And then came usable. And in the early 2000s, when I said to you in the beginning where websites you would put an add to cart button, right? You would click an add to cart button and you couldn't buy. So in the very beginning, this used to be a very popular way of doing conversion rate optimization. In fact,
and websites were very ugly back then.
Yeah, very ugly.
If you saw the one from Magmall, it was ugly.
And people did these a lot. And it was very good because in the aggregate you could get huge lifts. I mean, we became quite famous with usability lifts, but knew that there was a limit to what you could do. Why? Because if you think about usability, it's like dial tone on a phone. Once you can use the phone, you can't make the dial tone better. If it's usable, it's usable. You can maybe improve it a little bit, but you can't do better than that. And so the next part is intuitiveness, which is that's the ease, the simplicity of using it, not just whether you can use it. And then came persuasiveness, right? This was the part that really and truly was marketing. Now, it's the top of the pyramid. But when you look at this pyramid, it's easier to understand it this way, which says that the more opportunity is in the hardest things. And the hardest things are the ones at the top. So being persuasive is much harder than being functional, because being persuasive requires all the disciplines that most technology people don't have, right? And that makes them uncomfortable. We have a very unique way of thinking about conversion. If 3 people of 100 come to your website, that's a 3% conversion rate, right? Everybody agrees on that? Now, does that mean that 97% failed? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know. There's different scenarios that they could have come to your website for. Let's say that you're a store and also an online store, right? Maybe they came to check the address of your store, right? Or maybe they came because they needed some sort of information. If they got that information, it's not a conversion, but it's a success, right? And so the idea of building a website from the point of view of the visitor, of the customer coming to it, is very critical, because that's the only way you know, not conversion rate alone, but rather how many people achieved what they wanted to achieve. And so we gave a quite different definition to conversion rate early on than almost everybody else did. And so what we said is that conversion rate is a measure of your ability to persuade visitors to take the action you want them to take. Now that's quite traditional. The new part, the part that we think is very different, it's a reflection of your effectiveness and customer satisfaction. For you to achieve your goals, visitors must first achieve theirs. So it put the visitor at the center of everything you do in terms of designing and writing and implementing your website. And this process that we called persuasion architecture, and if you read, we have a book called Waiting for Your Cat to Bark where we explain this in a lot of detail, wound up giving us phenomenal results. When we used to have an agency, it was called Future Now. We're no longer associated with it, but we got great results. And we didn't just get great results in e-commerce, we got great results in tourism, we got great results from manufacturers. It was a great system because it started from the question of what we wanted them to achieve. But I'm not here to tell you how great that was. I want to give you an idea of where we're still not. There are very few people today that are in the place of persuasion architecture, and this was our idea of persuasion architecture, was approximately 2004, 2005, was when we really were thinking that this is where the world was going to go. But the problem, again, was that Einstein problem. This is complex. If I start explaining this process to you, you'll see, right? So first, we understood that there was a sales funnel. But again, it's that metaphor problem, right? It's the same problem as with the bucket. There is no gravity online, right? So we understood that there's only one thing that provides what we call persuasive momentum. It's what takes you from one click to the other. And it's the idea that one click, any click, has a promise. It's a contract. And whether explicitly or implicitly, you're making a promise. And you have to keep that promise. But how do we do that? So how do we form that? We base this whole process on 3 questions. The first one is we were trying to understand, who are we trying to persuade? And so, if you wanted to persuade me of something, or you wanted to persuade Brian of something, in many things we may be alike, but we're different, right? So who is the first question that you have to ask? That's what puts the visitor in the beginning of the question. The second is, what do we want them to do? Because that's important, because we're in business and we want them to do something. But the third one was much more important than that. What do they want to do? Are they ready to do what you want them to do, or do they need more information first? Do they need to do some other step first? Right? And so this process took us through a 6-step process for creating websites, for creating campaigns, and it was a 6 Sigma process. We let it become so complicated. It worked, but it was very complicated. And this 6-step process created personas, right, which were meant to give greater empathy, right, so that people could understand who the customers were. And then it asked us to plan their journeys and make the scenario that they were going to follow, and create storyboards that would show what we were going to do, and then test it, and then implement, and then measure and start again. Right? And this process, it was great. We were having great success before we sold our agency, and it was making us crazy because even training people was very, very difficult. But we did learn 2 things, right? One, besides speed, everything on the internet, if it's not fast, it's not good. But also, the bigger speed question was, how fast can you do something? Let me show you what our current standard is today, or tell you what our current standard is today. For us, the current standard is a company like Amazon. Now, Amazon does 30% of all the e-commerce in North America, right? But here's the thing. When Michael Jackson died, they were able to change the homepage of their MP3 page in 2 hours. We learned afterwards that at Amazon, everything takes 2 hours because they have a Q&A process that they go through in India. So it's impossible to do it faster. So they had to move. They basically had to have it ready in minutes, and then it had to be through India and get done. And they were able to do that. Now, what I ask you is, in your company, can you get a meeting to discuss whether you're going to change something in 2 hours? Or can you just get it done? Right? So in terms of speed of execution, this is one of the most important things that we learned. And in discussing against these conversion rate things, there are 3 basic elements to what matters. And the one that matters, I'm going to say the one that matters least, because they change so often, are the tools. And it's the one that everybody wants to focus on. Okay? And the tools do great things. They'll give you, they can show you great insights. They can help you create pages, right? What would we do without CMSs? They can help you test or personalize or create campaigns or automate campaigns. But again, tools without intelligent people are pretty useless, right? It's like if I gave you a box full of tools and said, I hope this house gets built, right? I hope it gets built too, but it'd be nice to have a construction crew, right? So people are the ones who have to have the insight that comes from the tools, right? They have to have the management and the creative execution and set up the tests and set up the implementation, or even bring in people from outside, some way of doing this. And the thing is the problem with people is people aren't very scalable. You can't take one person, put 100 people, and make it 100th of the time. It doesn't really work that way, right? But with processes, you can do some of that. So in processes, right, we can do planning and creation, we can do optimization, we can start cutting some of these processes down, but they're not a straight line, right? The best things that human beings can do, that we can't just do them by, like we can computers, by adding additional servers, although that would be very nice. So what are the 4 most important variables when it comes to increasing conversion rates? The first one is perceived control over conversion rates. The company has to believe it. The second one is a structured approach. The third is having someone directly responsible for conversion rate optimization, somebody whose job is that. And the fourth is giving an incentive to the staff based on conversion rates. You actually pay them some more money in order to do it. And I'm going to show you a study that's going to very quickly take you through that. Okay, so when asked by e-consultancy, how satisfied were you? If you look here, almost 70% of the people were not satisfied with their current conversion rate optimization efforts. Okay? In fact, 48% felt that they had no control over this process at all, which shocks me since I've been writing books about it for so long. The other one said that they had limited time and resources, and okay, so I'm sure there must be at least 5, 6, 7 companies here who have unlimited resources, right? Nobody, right? Okay, me either. I never found that company, right? Everybody has limited resources. It's how you use those resources. And so, yes, it's a reason, but it's also a very poor reason. The next question they were asked is, do they have a structured approach? And what you can see is the companies that had structured approaches, the more structured their approach, the more successful they were. And if they felt that they were in control of the process, they also increased the conversion rates most. So, again, not shocking. And if they had people actually dedicated to it, it helped even more.
Right. This one's the real interesting one, right? In the offline world, there's a vice president of marketing and a vice president of sales. In the online world, there's a vice president of marketing, and what's the equivalent in sales? Doesn't exist.
And they're not the same thing. The last one, which we found fascinating, was how many tests they carry out on their website. Now, is there anybody here who tests more than 10 things a month? 1, 2, 2, 3. There are 3 companies here that test more than 10 a month. I want to say congratulations. I think the Russian word is молодец, right? I'm impressed because it's really a high number. The average company tests between 3 and 5 tests a month. Now, here's the problem. Let's say that 25% of your tests are really good tests. If you're testing 5 tests a month, it means that you have 1 test a month. That's a pretty good test, right? If you're doing 10, it means maybe you have 2 tests that are pretty good. Is that about right for the people who are doing 10? That about 2 out of 10 are really better tests, right?
And to put in perspective, Amazon at any given time on their website has over 200 tests going on their website. So just do the math. If they can do 200 and the average company is doing 5, they're learning and getting better 40 times faster than every other competitor out there. And that's why they've grown so much.
Right. So I just want to point this out. That's why it's a speed question, but it's also a people and process question. And what's interesting is the ones who had the highest increase in conversion rates used the most methods, A/B testing and customer journey analysis and copy optimization. They did the most different kinds of tests as well. Again, not surprising, but that's where we are, that we actually have to have studies to tell us that if you pay more attention to this, it works better. So if you work hard, it pays off. Why? Because the companies whose conversion rates have increased over the past 12 months have used, on average, 26% more methods to improve conversion than those companies whose conversion rates have not improved. And the companies whose conversion rates have improved are using, on average, 50% more ways to segment their visitors and customers than companies whose conversions have not improved. Meaning, remember the first question, the who question that we had in persuasion architecture, who are we trying to persuade, is that much more important, right? Because you can segment, because the beauty of the web, right, is that I don't need to give you the same messages I give you and the same messages I give you. I can give you a different one, right? Maybe you came to the site before. Maybe you came from search, and maybe you came from an email, and I can present completely different experiences to you, right? So I just want to remind people of that. They forget. I'm not going to go through all the tools today. We have a website called Website Testing Tools, and this is because Brian's like a junkie, like an addict. Okay, he collects tools. He loves getting demonstrations of tools. He likes playing with the tools, and so he created a website where he just keeps some documentation of what's out there.
There's right now something like 180 different tools on there, all broken out by the different type of tool it is, whether it's an A/B testing tool, insight gathering tool, call tracking, whatever it is, it's up there.
Anyway, Go take a look.
And most of them are free or low cost.
Right. So I'm going to give you two tools. Okay. The first one, which is free, right? BT Buckets is free, right? Which is called BT Buckets, and it's a company out of Brazil, of all places. Okay. And they do personalization based on segmentation. So they can change your website experience based on where people are coming from. We know this is a very powerful thing. Very powerful.
And you should all be doing this. And you can create all kinds of complex rules. So if you came from search and you have more than $90 or in your shopping cart, and you have less than $90, I can give you different messages. Right? Very simple. So you can do all that kind of things just with this little tool, and it's free.
But the other tool, and it's also because it's another one of our favorites, is a paid tool. And it's an enterprise tool, so it's really a high-end tool. Brian and I are advisors to this company. But in particular, why I wanted to do it is the following. Remember I said it's the amount of tests. The average Monetate customer is testing over 40 tests a month at this point?
52.
52, okay. So they're testing over 50 tests a month using this tool. And that's why we...
One client... in their first 6 weeks of getting started, launched 600 different tests.
Right. So the tool is very versatile, very powerful. But it also gives us a huge advantage because it lets us cheat. We get to learn things that otherwise we would have never done. I can tell you that we've done thousands of tests, but now, just because of the velocity of Monetate, how often they're testing and with how many clients, they're often learning things that we didn't know, so we like seeing that too. So I'll show you some. The first one is badging, where you take an image and you put a little, you put over the image, maybe it's over the product, right? You can take this little thing that says, limited time only.
And this works, by the way, for whether you're in e-commerce or in business to business. If you sell a service or an online service, you can say this is best for small businesses and put it on there. This one's the low cost one. Same kind of concept. It just draws attention to it.
But the conversion rate impact from this were way higher than we ever would have imagined. So up to 55% is just a good thing to know. The second one is message consistency, and that's something that we would have taught, right? But essentially, just by taking a banner and following that banner with an offer all the way through to the shopping cart, all the way through to checkout, they can get conversion rates sometimes as high as 100%, but often between 5 and 20% just for maintaining the consistency, because customers don't remember what they saw from one to the next.
From one click to the next, people forget.
Okay? And if you think that we're exaggerating, okay, you'll give yourself that test at some point, and you'll see that none of us really remember because we're busy, we're distracted. Also, it was surprising to mostly American companies, okay? In Europe, this is not shocking. But when they put that the shipping was available for international shipment, conversion rates increased as much as 100%. And again, the idea that you could send it out, right, was sort of obvious to most of the companies who were doing it, but as soon as they made it obvious to their visitors, it was very powerful. The last thing we learned from them, which we had been advocates for a long time, is email acquisition. So I'm sure I'm not going to ask you to raise hands because I know almost all of you are doing some sort of social media, right? Yes? Okay. And as important as social media is, I can tell you the following. When we wrote Call to Action, which was our first bigger self-published book where we made a hardcover book, we were able to become a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and USA Today bestseller without any bookstore distribution. We were the first people in history to ever do that. And I don't say that because I'm trying to brag. I say that to explain the following to you. Today, we probably couldn't do it. We have lots of followers on Twitter, Facebook. It's very easy to get people's attention for about 1 second. Okay? But email is a bigger commitment. And if you can get people's email and send them really good email, really valuable email that they want to read, not that they put in their spam folder, okay, it is the most powerful tool by far. And there's new things that you can think about and ways of how you can merchandise getting an email. all 5 of these examples are different ways to ask people to sign up for email, right? And it's still, email lists are some of the most powerful things you can have. Every online retailer we deal with would shut down their social media program if it was between their social media program and email. Email makes money, social media makes noise. So I said to you before, when we've tried to simplify things over time. So when we wrote call to action, we wrote in call to action that we owned, we had a list of 1,100 factors that impacted conversion rates. Okay? Go ahead. If everybody's ready to take notes, I'll name them all. No, not really. Okay? But it was true. We had this factor when we had employees, we would show them the list and we would start teaching it to them, and it was a very long and tedious process. But by the time that Brian wrote Always Be Testing with his co-author John Cordovan Tividar, it was 2008, right, Brian? 2008. They had broken that down and said, you know, what's really important is 30 things, because all those 1,100 things fit into these 30 things, and so they simplified it down to 30 things. And that was great, okay, because when we were thinking about optimization, you could make it that much easier. And then we sold our agency. We left Future Now, and we had some time to think. And when we had some time to think, okay, we said we could make this even easier. And we broke it down to 3 things. And I will be showing that tomorrow in the masterclass, okay? And it'll be a very important example. But essentially, we said there are really 3 basic things that you need to do every time, 100% of the time, in order to convert. The first one is relevance. Is it important to me? If it's not important to me, if it's not relevant to me, then why should I care? The second one is, do I know why you're the right solution for me? Value, right? So value. Do I understand it? Not only is it important to me, but I can find something that I can do with this information. The third one is that I need to know what to do next. Do you want me to buy something? Do you want me to click something more? What should I do? Because it's not up to, if it's up to me what to do, I could go watch television or I can go pick up the phone, right? What do I do next? And this conversion trinity, we started teaching it, and Brian now teaches a class called for Market Motive, which is an online master certification class. And we have now taught this to hundreds of students who are coming out with the same results that they did when we were teaching it, when we were teaching 1,100 variables, right? So we've simplified, right? It took us some time to make it simpler and to make it easier to understand. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, okay? And then I'll break here. So my last thought has to do with that cat. And I told you that we wrote a book called Waiting for Your Cat to Bark. And in Waiting for Your Cat to Bark, the story was very, very simple. What we had said was that customers are very much like cats, not like dogs. We said that advertising was very similar to, advertising as in branding, was very similar to what Pavlov did, right? He rang the bell, he put meat on their dog's tongue, eventually they would salivate whenever they heard the bell. And we said, people are like cats, not like dogs. And that people would only do things when they found it interesting, right? If you have a cat, you know that you can't train them the same way that you can train a dog, right? Right? Russian cats are not different than American cats, right? And so what we said was that you always had to find a way to interest them in doing it. When it comes down to the very, very simplest thing that I can tell you, the biggest confession I can give you is that I don't actually know what it will take for all of you to embrace conversion rate optimization. I have no idea. Okay, Brian and I have been doing this now almost 15 years, and it couldn't be simpler. It couldn't possibly make you more money than anything else than you've done before in the past. And yet, very often I feel like I'm trying to talk to the cat. I don't know why. Okay, I don't know why the resources and time won't be devoted to it, but that's the truth. I thank you, and we have a very short break before. Do we have time for some questions?
Yeah, we could do some questions now, or we can leave it until the end, like
We
you want.
could leave it until the end. So do you want to do a quick break between? What are we doing?
Да, предлагается сделать либо очень короткий перерыв сейчас, либо задать вопросы. Я думаю, что лучше, наверное, вопросы задавать уже в конце, да, всего выступления, а сейчас просто немножко передохнуть. Okay, let's leave it until the end of both of us.
I have the